Live from his home studio in Illinois, please welcome the host of You Want Answers, Jason Rahm.
Well, hello, everybody out there in the community. I am Jason Rahm, as Peter just so fabulously introduced me, and this is You Want Answers. Welcome back to another show. And today we're going to talk about one of my old flames, iRules. And we're going to talk specifically about, I'm not going to go all Shakespearean on you because it's been quite a while since I've had Hamlet in my back pocket. But to iRule or to not iRule, that is the question, whether it is nobler, and I'll stop there. But we're just going to get into this today. And so to iRule or not to iRule. So we'll start with a stack question that I answered, the Stack Overflow, which is a adjacent community to the DevCentral community. And by the way, we're involved in a lot of communities, so we don't just answer questions on DevCentral. If we see F5 related questions pop up in Stack, or sometimes I'll look at Python or Tickle questions, although most of the people that tackle those know way more about those subjects than I do. But F5 related stuff, we'll jump on and we'll answer questions there. Spiceworks, I've been involved out there some as well. And so we get to the ones more quickly when they're on DevCentral, because I'm watching those. But the ones that are in adjacent communities, every now and then I'll see those and I'll go out and answer the question. So to that end, there was a question, and by the way, it's been removed by the author since he asked it, and I'm not really sure why he pulled it off. Maybe the Stack heavies that like to put negative ones on questions intimidated him. But anyway, it was pulled off. But he asked, I'm new to the load balancers. I have a situation where we have one application deployed and it's deployed on different ports, but it's the same server. So same IP, different ports. And I want to route my request to another port if one of them's down. I thought about using an iRule to do that, but did not find a solution. Can you help me out? And so, let's look at that a little bit. And the first rule of iRules, I don't know if you guys are Fight Club fans, but the first rule of iRules is don't use an iRule. Okay. iRules are not always the best choice. I love iRules, and where they're necessary, use them, but where they're not necessary, they're best to be avoided. And so what I responded to the question with is, that's a perfect solution for priority groups. And if you look at this pool that I've configured on my lab box, now in my lab, I just differentiate by IP instead of port. So you can see here the two pool members, 10.0.4.20 port 80 and 10.04.30 port 80. The difference is the IP address, but it works exactly the same if they were the same IP, different ports. But it was just easier for me, since I already had the pool members established on my virtual machine to be IP addresses, to do it that way. And so if you look at the priority group here at the far right, you've got a priority group of 10 for 4.20, and you've got a priority group of 5 for 4.30. And what this means is, it depends on what the technology is and what the functionality is of what is higher priority, whether it's a low number or a high number. With priority groups, it's higher. And so if you have established a 10 over a 5, it means that particular pool member is going to get the traffic until it's not available. And then 4.30 will kick in, because we set the priority group activation to be less than one available member. Now, if I had it to be less than 2 available members, or 3 or 4 or 5, and you had a bigger pool, well, then it's doing those calculations on what percentage of servers do you have available at that priority group level. I kept it simple: 2 pool members, the 1 available member. When that one goes down, then 4.30 should take over the traffic. So in that case, no iRule necessary. We'll walk through the specifics here in the Nerd Life pool, in that everything's alive here, and I sent 100 connections through from my test client through Big IP and back to my Ubuntu virtual machine on the back end. And pool member 4.20, which is higher priority group, took all of that traffic. They're both available, but because I've established those priority groups, it gets all the traffic. So then I disable that pool member, and then I send 100 more connections through. And then you can see there in this last screenshot that the 4.30 pool member then took those next 100 connections, because the priority group 10 pool members are not available. And so that is a way where you're using built-in functionality to your F5 devices instead of going the iRule path. And again, I love iRules, and there's great reasons to use them. And honestly, you can get really comfortable with using iRules because they're kind of fun, and you build like a skill set in there, and then it's like, hey, I could solve all these problems with iRules, so I think I will. But you got to take a step back and see what works in the product, what are some other available options to me. And so if we take a look at another scenario, it's like, okay, the original author, he asked just about sending one to another. But what if you need persistence on that? So when I'm answering questions, and maybe this is something as you advance in your career, but early on in my DevCentral days, if a question was asked, I answered that. What I saw some people who were more seasoned than I is that they would try and expand upon what was being asked to understand really the whole scenario, so that they could give better and wiser feedback. And so that's something in this scenario where you take a step back and say, okay, I know that this is what you're asking, but do you also need to be concerned about persistence? Because what happens with priority groups is that as soon as that higher priority group is available, then the pool is going to start sending traffic back to that. And that might break your active connections if they need to stay persistent to that server. Now, if it's something like a web server and you have application servers behind that the web servers are sending traffic to, that's no big deal. Those web server sacrificial lambs don't really care about persistent sessions. But if you need it, then you need to be considerate of that. And so what happens if you need that persistence? You say, well, great, there's an iRule for that. In fact, I've seen it out in the code share. And so we go out to the code share and we take this single node persistence entry. I remember when we built the code share years and years ago, copied this out of an article from Deb Allen had created this. In fact, I used this for a time in my own environment as a customer. And so it's basically, it sticks whatever pool member the connections are going to at that time, it sticks to that one. This iRule is using the persistence profile, and it's the universal persistence profile UIE. And basically what that does, first connection through, it persists to a single server, and then all connections after that are going to persist to that server. And so great, problem solved. All my persistence is done. However, first rule of iRules is what? Don't use an iRule, right? Yes, that iRule works. However, destination address persistence, which is built in, is a better way to handle that. Because what the destination address affinity persistence profile does is it maps all your connections coming in to the virtual address, your virtual address of your VIP. And so, well, since they're all going to match that, then they all go to the same server on the back end. So there's a built-in function, and there's several reasons why you would want to use built-in functions. So let's talk about that. Number one, we don't use iRules because if they aren't necessary. Sometimes you need advanced functionality, and so in those situations, yes, by all means, use an iRule. That's what they're there for, and they're incredible, and you can do amazing things with iRules. But if there are built-in functions in the product that can handle that, whether it's in core LTM through pool options, profile options, you could have virtual server options that do things that we used to have to do in iRules, things like TLS SNI, and even DNS over HTTP. That is something that was only an iRule solution or an iRules LX solution when DNS over HTTP became a thing a couple of years ago. Now it's part of the product in most recent release. And so, one of the recommendations there is, even if you've always done something with an iRule, take a step back, evaluate as every new release of product comes out. Make sure that you are reading the release notes. Make sure that you're looking at the guidance articles that we drop on DevCentral, stuff that hits Ask F5. You want to make sure you're dialed into those locations for content, because things that you've always done in iRules might be better done in the product. And when you're looking at logic of, should I have all my logic of what the application does in an iRule, or should it be in the product, or should it be some mix of both? Then you're talking about operational overhead of understanding where the logic is. So the more you can put into the product, the less you put into iRules, the better off you are long term. But where you need iRules, you use them. And then, of course, the kind of the hybrid there, the mix between the two would be local traffic policies. It is an object that is built in, so it's going to be more performant than iRules, but it is also less flexible. It's less feature rich than you can write from scratch in an iRule. So you definitely want to explore the functionality in local traffic policies before you reach for an iRule. There are some things you can do iRule-esque in policies, where you can use some native tickle in your local traffic policies. But you want to make sure that local traffic policy before iRule, and built-in objects in the product before local traffic policies. So those would be my recommendations in the to iRule or not to iRule. All right. Next, resources here and they're dropping them in the comments, but Chase Abbott has a great intro to local traffic policies on DevCentral. Kind of talks about some of the things I talked about, or when you use an iRule versus not, pros and cons of both approaches. I have an article out there on verifying local traffic policy and iRule precedents. So if you are in a position where you need a little bit of functionality in the iRule, but you want most of the functionality in your local traffic policy for performance reasons, which one takes precedence? To spoil that storyline, a local traffic policy has precedence over iRules. But if you have a chance to test, I always test. It's like, who is it? Trust but verify. Was that Reagan? I don't remember which president that was, but I always like to test and make sure I understand how things work. And so I go through in that article how to do that. How do you log from all the events so that you can see where the events in a traffic policy are firing versus the iRules events and where they're firing, and how you might hand off decisions from one to the other. Personally, if I need a policy, if I need an iRule, I'll just move all the logic from a policy into an iRule, because I just like my operational head to be around one thing instead of multiple things. And so my approach would always be iRule over a mix. If I can do everything in a policy, I'll do the policy. If I can do everything, if I can't do everything in a policy, then I move everything to the iRule, unless there's some very simple overhead stuff that's the 90% solution in the policy. So those are some things. And then we also have some articles on DevCentral on LTM policy, on local traffic policy recipes. And so go check those out. Definitely recommend policy over iRule. Definitely recommend profiles and built-in object functionality over policies. So know your equipment, know what you have available to you, and take a step back, look at everything before you just immediately reach for the iRule out of your toolbox. And I say that as the biggest fan of iRules. I mean, iRules really changed the core direction of my career. When I was a customer, latched onto some iRules that blew my mind as far as how that was possible, and paved the way for me to eventually become an F5er. So, I owe my career arc to iRules, and yet use them only where you need them. All right. Well, sometimes when you do things live, they don't turn out exactly how you thought they would. And that is the case with the second half of the show today. I thought I was sharing my screen, but I in fact was not. So this is the redo. A couple weeks ago on DevCentral Connects, we did some iRules training, and John and I laid out this challenge that people could take on. And one of the things that when you're learning any programming language or maybe learning any skill, it's like if you don't really have a challenge to solve, it's hard to get in and get down to the brass tacks. And so that's what this challenge was intended to do. And so in this episode, I'm going to break down the challenge and give a little bit of an overview, and then dig into how I solved the problem and some thoughts about that. Okay, so we're going to go through the challenge, and the article that I released when we did the lab day back on August 19th. Man, it's crazy how quickly this month or this year is going. Can't believe we're already in September. So back a couple weeks ago, we introduced this challenge where little Jimmy Packets, our mascot, had been captured skiing at Keystone, Colorado by bad actor Bob. He created some clones of them, placed them around the globe, and also Bob infected some visitors from numeric land of 172.16.2.0/23. And so the fine people of Celestial City waiting for Jimmy Packets to arrive need to make sure the gatekeeper, Mr. Big IP, only allows in those who should come in. So breaking down the details, the URL that is legitimate is celestial-city.devcentral.test. Anybody that is not Jimmy Packets should go to the Welcome Wagon pool. If it's Jimmy Packets, he should go to Easy Street pool, as long as Jimmy Packets is not coming from one of the countries where the clones are known to have resided. And of course, if the source traffic, we don't want traffic going to the Welcome Wagon from that source of infected people from numeric land. And then we have some log information about where the clones are found, that we want to identify that they're false, and that they, what their source IP address is, what their country of origin was, and the full user agent that came in. And then, of course, also, if the domain is not right, we want to log only the subdomain part of that and respond with a meme of your choice. And so we detailed the lab requirements. You really shouldn't have needed much except a big IP with a LTM licensed and a lightweight client and server. If you needed the server, if you're clever, you didn't even need that. And so basically I walked through the solution is that I drew a picture, and I always like to start with pictures. So I kind of work out all the high level details of what I'm asked to solve. And with this, Jimmy Packets is, primary path, he's going to go to Easy Street. If it's the real Jimmy Packets, if it's a Jimmy Packets clone from one of those countries listed here, we don't care about him. I don't care about those. We want to reject those. But if it's the real Jimmy Packets, we want him to go to Easy Street if it's available. If Easy Street isn't available, we want him to go back to the backup path, the Welcome Wagon, just like everybody else coming into Celestial City. And of course, everybody coming from numeric land, we want to block as well, because they're all infected. And so, there's a lot of different approaches you can take to this. In fact, you don't need an iRule for all of this solution. But as we talked about in the show, if I can solve it in an iRule, but or if I can't solve it all in a local traffic policy, definitely just want to move it all into an iRule so I don't have to manage the logic in both places. So the static countries, that list of countries that are the clones, I set that in a static namespace in rule init. That means that on a connection by connection basis, I don't need to create that. So I'm not wasting operations in the performance of my iRule. And then I do more things in client accepted, because HTTP request, every request that comes in, that's going to fire. But I don't need to reset or recompare on every HTTP request where that client source is. So I take care of that in client accepted. And then I set that is from numeric land. I set that to 1. If the active members in that pool, Easy Street, is at least 1, then go ahead and set that to true. And then in the HTTP request, then I'm going to walk through here. ultimately, this pool welcome wagon, that's in the default setting of the virtual server. I include it here just for brevity's sake, but it's not something I would actually code into the iRule. That would be in the virtual server. And then in the I look for the host. If it's not equal to celestialcity.devcentral.test, then I set the domain responder. Hey, that's not one that we support. So I'm going to have a responder on that. And then I'm also going to log whatever that subdomain is that was not correct. I'm going to log that. So I'm going to pull that out with the string range command. And then I'm going to look at the user agent. If it contains Jimmy packets, and of course I'm going to use that string to lower here. And that's critical right there. Because user agents are case sensitive, whereas the host is not case sensitive, and so I do want to make sure I lower that so I catch all whether it's capital or not, that it's going to match Jimmy packets, and then I search that list based upon the IP client adder. That whereas command is gonna reveal the 2-digit country code for me. And then it's going to compare my list. And as long as it's in that list, I'm going to set that clone responder to 1. And then, of course, if it is Jimmy packets and Easy Street is available, I'm going to set the pool to Easy Street so it doesn't go to the default of Welcome Wagon. And then I set differently here my responders. I keep my logic separate rather from the conditions. I'm saying these are all the conditions I'm trying to handle, and then this is the reaction to all of those. And so I'm using the variables that I set to either respond or not respond, and then so that's the solution. Of course, my log statements, I'm logging the information that was a request for clones. I'm doing the whereas lookup. I'm doing the source IP, and of course I'm logging the whole header. And so some comments on this is that only use the pool when you need to use the pool, and the rule init is useful to use data that's not changing. You can change it even if you set it in rule init, but I typically only put stuff in the rule init that's not going to change. For the 3 reject conditions, I did use individual variables there. And so I'm setting 3 variables when really I could just do set responder, and I could then set the status to, numland or Easy Street, or I'm sorry, the domain, the clone, or the numland. And I could use a string in there and use 1 variable, but it was easier instead of comparing against conditions within that. By using info exists, I can just set it to a true value of 1. And the other thing I like doing is, instead of doing the if else of setting variables where you're really trying to set a Boolean state, instead of having to have an if else to set it to 0 or 1, just set it to 1, and then you can use info exists, and that prevents all those tickle errors that you might get where a variable wasn't set and you're calling it, but it was never set. And so that's where I'll use info exists in that. And then one of the things, and it's been a while, the string range is how I approached pulling out that subdomain part. There's probably in a more efficient way, but I'm out of daily practice with iRules, so it's been a thing. The IP adder comparison, I did want to point that out as well before I get out of here. This one that's the performance, or it's really just doing an IP address comparison. But there's 7 different ways that you can do this, 7 different formats that are acceptable to the syntax checker. This is the most performant, and I have an article on that I link in this challenge article, and you'll want to go check that out, because like I said, there's 7 ways to do it. This is the most performant after testing, and so this is the way to go. Before we get out of here, and I wanted to address what we have coming up this month. We've got a lot of fantastic shows. And so next week, John and I are going to be back here with Bill Dunford from NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. And we're just going to talk about technology in space. You think about the things that we do with terrestrial stuff, that is, for high availability and just for connectivity. And when we have failures there, that's kind of easy to solve. If you send stuff to space and you've made mistakes, you're pretty much just going to have to send something new to space, either to fix that or just, to replace it. And I don't know specifically what the tonnage cost is to send stuff up, but I know it's not cheap. I know depending on if it's, Blue Origin or SpaceX or NASA, here in the United States or other countries that also have cargo loads. That's not a cheap endeavor. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about some of that stuff and other space related things. And then on the 16th, John will be here with Security Sidebar talking digital as default with our very own Lori McVitie from the Office of the CTO. She's always a fantastic interview, so that'll be good. On the 23rd, we have some news, and we've kind of teased it over the last few weeks. And on the 23rd, that drops. We're going to have a great show, and that we're going to have some fantastic things to talk about. So tune in on the 23rd for that, and then we'll close out not only the month but also the fiscal year with a special DevCentral Connects. We're going to do the Digital Customer Engagement Center, which is kind of a lab framework that a couple of our engineers are building to make it easier for customers to be able to engage with our technology in custom personal labs, whether it's on your own desktop or out in the cloud. And so Vinny Matza and John Cowling will be joining us on the 30th for that. So we very much look forward to having you back next week. I apologize about my screen share. Holy cow, that's frustrating. I'm sure that was not fun to deal with. So my apologies for that. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you out there in the community. If you like this kind of content, make sure you subscribe. You'll get notifications when we're releasing new shows, when John's dropping a light board, when Peter's dropping something. So give us a like, hit subscribe. We'll see you out there in the community. Thank you all.